Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts' Ukraine War Frontline update for the 14th of January 2024. A relatively quick one today. I often say that, but actually it should really be pretty quick. If you don't know what the lines mean on my map, please check out the key on the screen at the moment. Pause the video. Otherwise, we'll go to the map that JR has very kindly updated today. Most of these are sort of from yesterday, but where there's some weird issues with Google Earth not updating the lines, or Google Maps, one of the two. We make the maps on Google Earth and then, make them on Google Maps and then transport them across into Google Earth. And sometimes weird things happen. And yesterday the pins were there, but some of the lines weren't. So anyway, just a bit of clarity today. We saw, as we talked about yesterday, these gains up in the north for the Ukrainians pushing the Russians back. Those lines should represent what has taken place. That's in the northeastern sector. Not too much to report about this whole northeastern axis, really, from Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimea down there, so this whole area in the northeast. Geolocated footage published on the 13th indicates that Russian forces advance east of Torska. So this is Torska down here, the salient where the Russians are pushing westwards from Crimea towards Torska, towards Liman. So Torska is down there. Let's see where this shows the Russians. The Smiley unit of the 63rd Mechanized Brigade is dropping on Russian infantry east of Torska. So we'll see where the Russians are. Of course, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have robust control over this area. As I always say, it could just be that that's where they've advanced to. So it could be in the grey zone. But this is actually safely behind where both the mappers in the area, Andrew Perpetua and Surat Maps, has the Russian line. So I don't think that suggests there's any advancing. And it's not either that the ISW is sort of lagging behind or something like that. Actually, these lines have been in that area for an awful long time, really. My map hasn't changed here. There's been a lot of changes to the north, and I think Surat Maps was a little bit overconfident with the Russian gains up here and has walked them back subsequently. In that particular area, we had this whole area gained recently, but this salient towards Torska and Zarechnev, you remember there were these claims that the Russians were in Torska at one point and then it was all kind of walked back a bit, but that was months and months ago. This has not changed for ages. So the idea that that the Russians have advanced east of Torska, I think is not true. But then ISW's map might well be very different from these two mappers, so it might be a lot more conservative in this area. So there is that to bear in mind. Right. Okay. In fact, almost certainly that will be the case. Otherwise, they're completely talking nonsense, and I don't think they're doing that. Right. So coming on to Bakhmut, you can see there are no changes to the Bakhmut area. ISW states a few things about the area, but the only bit I picked out that I thought was worthy of note is a Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces decrease the intensity of their assaults. So the idea that the Ukrainians are on the assault and counter battery fire near Klishchivka. Ukrainian military observer Mashevets has stated that Russian forces have advanced 3.6 kilometers in the direction of Bodanivka and 2.1 kilometers in the direction of Ivanivska since intensifying offensive operations in the Bakhmut direction in late October. That's nothing that we don't know. So they have advanced 3.6 kilometers and 2.1 kilometers since the October counteroffensive started in this area for the Russians. Well, if we look at Bodanivka, so that's here. Let's put a bit of a measurement on that. Actually, so there we have 2.9 kilometers, but they were fighting back from where the Ukrainians had moved. In fact, the Ukrainians were in Bakivka at one point. So you could say that actually the Russians have pushed the Ukrainians back 5 kilometers since the height of what the Ukrainians were achieving. So that puts into context what those measurements are. But really, another day of relative stasis there shows that the Ukrainians have stabilized the front in the area, or that the Russians have culminated properly. I don't know. It just depends what the Russians are willing to throw at these places and whether they are able to drum up new recruits and send them straight in to effect a change here, or whether the Ukrainians have enough to withstand any further attacks from the Russians. There might be the odd kilometre here and there, but it seems like a lot of the places along the front line have stabilised a lot more than they were, say, a month and a half ago. And Avdiivka is another one of these places where there are the occasional small gains here and there, but in terms of the general, in terms of the idea that the Russians are definitely going to cut off this road and close the neck of the cauldron, I don't know that they can do that. However, you never know, because it is precarious here. As I've said before, the Russians only need to advance a couple of kilometers here in either direction, and that's the end of it for Avdiivka. So it really is on a knife edge, but the Ukrainians have the advantage with the coke plant in the north that they have robust control over, and these fields in the south being very flat, and so it's very difficult for the Russians to attack from there. Anyway, Getty says the armed forces of Ukraine defeated the Russians from the central part of Stepova. Meanwhile, the armed forces of the Russian Federation advanced a little further to the south and east of Stepova. So the idea there's a bit of push and shove. Now, I don't know whether it's actually Stepova where we saw the Bradleys, and I said Bradleys because I think there was more than one having a go at that tank, that T-90M tank. The talk was is in the Avdiivka area, and I think it probably was Stepova. I talked about driving down between these two tree lines, and actually, although kind of they are tree lines in a sense, really they are lines of houses, and I think it could well have been here that they were firing the high explosive Bushmaster rounds at the T-90 tank, and then the T-90 tank took one for the team, drove off with its turret spinning, but then there are other reports that in the other videos it actually was later destroyed, and that's why it was noted as destroyed by Andrew Perpetua. Anyway, I think that's probably that area. And indeed, the ISW talks in their synopsis not a lot on Avdiivka, which is incredible to think that just after the Russians have poured in so many resources to the area, and this is what it has effectively amounted to now. Geolocated footage published on the 13th indicates that the Russian forces advance in western Stepova and east of Stepova. And here, I think, those are tree lines there. Nonetheless, anyway, the Bradley M2 engaged a Russian position, so I don't know that this is the one where it engaged a tank, but the Bradleys are really active in this area, and this is one of the areas where the recent Forbes article was talking on how the Ukrainians really are mastering the use of the Bradley to help them. And let's go and see where that is geolocated. So this is the tree line that we're talking about. Russian positions there being strafed by the Bradley, and then we have another one. The Bradley position in attacking that tree line was here. Go back. So that's where the Russian position is, which is behind Russian lines, as according to both mappers there. And the Bradley is just nearby in the grey zone, almost certainly having to go at the Russian position there. So that is some geolocation there. I don't think it suggests any advances, as is often the way with the ISW indicating advances. I mean, that's probably an advance from mapping that was from some time back, but I don't think it shows any advances as far as our map is concerned. Right, and then moving on further to the south, and you can see nothing to report from Mariinka Novomykhailivka, nothing to report from Velika Novosilka, nothing to report particularly from Robotina, although I have highlighted some things. Oh, just to say that actually in Avdiivka there is a slight gain for the Russians in the water treatment area, just this little area as according to Syriac maps, but that's really it as far as the whole front line is concerned. This is a minor gain. This isn't from the last 24 hours, but it's just to show you that the pin we had yesterday that didn't have the line around it now has a line around it, but that was yesterday's gain. So really that the one in the water treatment area north of Avdiivka is the only significant gain, or only gain from my mapping sources, as I say, until we get down to Robotina, but even then there are no changes to my sources. Just a little bit to talk about from here. So a Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces advanced less than a kilometer southeast of Robotina and west of Verbove. Another mill blogger claimed that Russian forces have recently intensified tactical actions near Nestoryanka and captured an unspecified Ukrainian position in this area on January the 12th, but the ISW has not confirmed any of those claims. Okay, so Nestoryanka is over here, round the corner past Kopani, towards Kamyanka over here, Kamyanska over there on the Zaporizhia reservoir. But other than that, the claims that we had sort of the last few days that the Russians made some gains here and in Verbove. However, there are also counterclaims that Ukrainians have made gains in this area near Robotina and have taken back control of these trench lines along this tree line there, that both sides have fought quite hard over the last, well, I guess 4 months or so, 4 or 5 months. Well, probably less than that, actually, given how long it took the Ukrainians to get down and through Robotina. So, yeah, some gains possibly for the Russians, confirmed there by the ISW to the west of Verbove. Right, then we're going to come down to Krinky and the Dnipro River, where, as you can see, there are no changes to the mapping again, and it's more of the same, which is attracting, fixing, attriting the Russian forces, and that's what the Ukrainians seem to be doing there. The ISW says of this area, this that I think is of note, Mashevets, the Ukrainian military analyst and observer, stated that Ukrainian drone activity is so widespread on the east bank that the Russian Dnipro grouping of forces has started to issue alerts to their personnel about when Russian drones will operate in the area, since Russian forces are increasingly mistaking their own drones for Ukrainian drones and are firing on them. So that's interesting. So that says really that the Ukrainians still have that drone advantage in that localized area, something that we've heard a lot before. We've heard from Russian sources that the counter battery fire has been better there for the Ukrainians, that the drone activity has been better there, and the electronic warfare for the Ukrainians has been better in that particular area. Of course, we can't extrapolate that across the front line. So really not a lot of change. That's the frontline update. As I said, last few days, a week or so, when there's no change like this during a period where the Russians really should be on the offensive and taking ground because the Ukrainians have themselves culminated, like this is the phase for the Russians. If this is what it amounts to, then that's not good news for the Russians. What have the Russians done since November? Well, really since August 2022? Not a lot. And I will keep labouring that point because it's super important. So many people will try and control the narrative from the pro-Russian point of view to say how terrible and how the Ukrainians are doing and how much of a failure their attacks have been. It's like, hang on, let's get some perspective here. Their success has been in keeping the Russians to where they are and where they have been, in taking back Kharkiv and Kherson on the west bank of the river there, and then not allowing the Russians really to make any other gains. The Russian gains in this period of their offensive have been less impressive than the Ukrainian gains in their counter-offensive for the same time period. And that, if you are somebody who is calling the Ukrainian counter-offensive a failure, then the Russian offensive at the moment must be even more of a failure. And we must remember that. It's all about perspective here. Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care. Speak soon.